The planet Corthon 4 was an unremarkable rock on the outskirts of the Andromeda sector. It had no known sentient species, no valuable minerals, and was barely habitable for most spacefaring civilizations. The Galactic Concordance had classified it as a red zone world, one of those planets where the natural conditions made colonization an absolute nightmare. For centuries, the only ones who dared land on Corthon 4 were rogue scavengers and outlaws looking for a place to hide from the authorities. But all of that changed when the USS Pathfinder, a human research vessel, accidentally crash-landed on the surface. It wasn't supposed to be here. The ship had been mapping dark energy fluctuations when a sudden gravitational anomaly pulled it in. The crew barely had time to react before emergency sirens blared through the corridors. "Brace for impact," Captain Elias Dorn shouted, gripping the nearest rail. The Pathfinder tore through the planet's atmosphere, fire licking at its hull. The impact sent a tremor across the barren land, leaving a deep crater in its wake. Inside the ship, sparks flew as crew members scrambled to assess the damage. "We've lost primary engines, life support is holding at 60%, and the distress beacon is offline," Chief Engineer Maya Carter reported. "Perfect," Elias muttered. "And here I was hoping for a boring day." Outside, the planet's terrain stretched out in an endless expanse of blackened rock and twisted, petrified forests. The air was thick with particles, making every breath feel heavy. But none of that was the real danger. The real problem was the things watching them. Unseen observers. At first, the crew didn't notice. They were too busy repairing their ship, setting up defenses, and trying to re-establish communications with the nearest human outpost. But as the days passed, strange occurrences began. First, it was the supplies. Boxes of rations left outside mysteriously vanished overnight. Tools were found misplaced or broken. Then the sightings began, dark figures lurking at the edge of their vision just beyond the floodlights. Maya was the first to catch a clear glimpse of them. She had been working on a field generator when she felt something watching her. When she turned, she saw a shape, a hunched, reptilian figure with bioluminescent eyes, half hidden behind the jagged rock formations. Her breath caught. "Captain," she whispered into her comm, "I think we're being watched." Elias' voice crackled back. "You sure it's not just local wildlife? If it is, then it's smart wildlife." That was the moment they realized the planet wasn't as uninhabited as they thought. The evolutionary catalyst. When the crew tried to investigate, the creatures vanished like ghosts, leaving behind only faint footprints in the ashen soil. The scientists on board became obsessed with understanding them. Dr. Halvorsen, the lead xenobiologist, analyzed everything they could find: traces of saliva, shed skin, biological samples left on stolen equipment. The data was baffling. "These things, they shouldn't be this advanced," he muttered, scanning the samples. "Their DNA is in a state of flux. It's like they're evolving at an accelerated rate." "How is that possible?" Maya asked. Dr. Halvorsen shook his head. "I don't know. But I think we might be responsible." Elias frowned. "Explain." Halvorsen pulled up a holographic display. "Remember the waste we dumped when we landed? The nanite-infused rations? The protein-based repair gel? All of that was absorbed into the environment. And these creatures, somehow, their biology adapted to it instantly." "You're saying we accidentally kicked their evolution into high gear?" Halvorsen nodded grimly. "Not just their evolution. Their intelligence." The implications were staggering. The crew had inadvertently created a new species, one that was developing at an unnatural rate. And that was a problem. Because the aliens who actually claimed this planet, they were not happy. The arrival of the Corthon Dominion. The distress signal may have been down, but someone had noticed the Pathfinder's crash. A week after their arrival, long-range scanners picked up an incoming fleet. "Multiple ships inbound," the sensor officer reported. "Markings matched the Corthon Dominion." Elias clenched his jaw. Of course it's them. The Corthons were a warlike empire, known for their brutal expansionism. They had once ruled Corthon 4 before abandoning it due to its harsh conditions. To them, this planet was a dead world, an old mistake they had no reason to return to. Until now. "They must have detected the genetic shift," Halvorsen guessed. "And they won't like what they see." "Great," Maya muttered. "So, we've got a pissed-off alien empire coming to investigate, a new species evolving at a breakneck pace, and we're still stuck here with no way off this rock." Elias exhaled. "Sounds like a typical human problem." The Corthon fleet arrived in force. Massive warships loomed over the planet's surface, scanning for anomalies. It didn't take them long to realize what had happened. "We are receiving a transmission," the comm officer announced. "It's hostile." Elias nodded. "Put them through." The view screen crackled to life, revealing a Corthan commander, a reptilian humanoid with piercing golden eyes. His expression was one of fury. "Humans?" he spat. "You have committed an abomination. This world was cleansed of the defective spawn, yet you have revived them." Elias folded his arms. "We didn't revive anything. We just—" "Silence," the Corthan commander snarled. "You have no idea what you've done." He gestured to his officers, and suddenly the Pathfinder's scanners lit up. The creatures, the ones that had been watching them, were now swarming across the landscape. But they were different. Larger, stronger, more coordinated. And they were moving toward the Corthan forces. The commander's expression darkened. This world was purged for a reason. Now, thanks to you, the nightmare begins anew. Elias' stomach twisted. "What nightmare?" The Corthan bared his fangs. "The last time these creatures evolved, they nearly wiped out our empire. We had to burn this planet to stop them." Silence fell over the bridge. Maya swallowed. "Oh, Captain?" Elias sighed. "Yeah. I think we just started a war." Outside, the ground trembled as the newly evolved creatures emerged from the darkness. Their bioluminescent eyes burned like stars, their bodies rippling with newfound strength. And they were looking straight at the Corthans. The moment stretched into eerie silence. On one side, the Corthan forces stood rigid, their reptilian forms tense with barely restrained fear. On the other, the newly evolved creatures, sleek, muscular beings with bioluminescent markings that pulsed in eerie synchronization, emerged from the darkness. And between them, caught in the middle of a potential genocide, was the crew of the Pathfinder. Captain Elias Dorn's mind raced. Every instinct told him to run, to get his people off this planet as fast as possible. But there was nowhere to go. Their ship was still grounded, their distress beacon dead, and even if they had a way out, the moment they made a move, the Corthans would likely turn their weapons on them. Maya Carter broke the silence. "So, what's the plan?" Elias exhaled, forcing himself to think. "We buy time. We need to understand what we're dealing with." But the Corthan commander had no intention of waiting. "Humans," he snarled, his golden eyes blazing through the view screen. "You will stand down. This planet and its abominations belong to the Dominion." Elias narrowed his eyes. "Abominations? You mean the species we accidentally evolved?" "You do not understand," the Corthan hissed. "We purged these creatures for a reason. They are an affront to the natural order, intelligent predators that exist solely to consume and adapt. If they spread beyond this world, nothing will stop them." Maya let out a nervous laugh. "Well, that sounds bad." Dr. Halvorsen, still glued to his scanner, shook his head. "Captain, they're not just evolving. They're learning. In real time." Elias frowned. "Explain." Halvorsen tapped his console. "Look at their movements. They're organized. This isn't some mindless swarm, this is tactical. They're watching us, analyzing our behavior. They've been doing it since we landed." Elias' stomach tightened. That changed everything. The creatures weren't just adapting biologically. They were strategizing. The first strike. The Corthan commander must have reached the same conclusion, because his next words were cold and final. "This world must be cleansed again." Elias had no time to argue before the Corthans opened fire. Orbital bombardment rained down from the sky, reducing entire swaths of the planet to molten slag. The ground shuddered as shockwaves tore through the landscape. The newly evolved creatures let out an unnatural guttural cry, one that reverberated not just through the air but through their minds. And then they moved. Faster than any of them expected. One moment they were scattered across the rocky terrain. The next they were everywhere. The first wave hit the Corthan ground forces like a hurricane. Bioluminescent bodies blurred through the battlefield, weaving between energy blasts with impossible precision. Clawed appendages slashed through armor like paper. The Corthans, once so sure of their superiority, found themselves being overwhelmed by an enemy that had learned their tactics in seconds. From the Pathfinder's bridge, Elias watched in stunned horror. "They're winning." Maya swallowed hard. "Captain, if they take down the Corthans, what do you think happens next?" Elias clenched his jaw. He already knew the answer. They would come for them. The revelation. Dr. Halvorsen suddenly stood up. "We need to communicate with them." Elias turned sharply. "Are you insane?" "No, listen to me," Halvorsen insisted. "Their evolution isn't just physical, it's mental. They're already mirroring our behavior. If we establish communication first, We might be able to stop this before it spirals into total war. Elias hesitated. It was a risk. A huge risk. But doing nothing was worse. How? He asked. Halvorson's fingers flew over his console. They're emitting low-frequency neural pulses. I think it's a primitive form of telepathic communication. If I can match the frequency. Before Elias could approve or object, Halvorson activated the transmission. A pulse of energy rippled through the air, silent, invisible to the naked eye, but something felt different. The creatures froze mid-attack. The battlefield stilled. Even the Korthans, battered and retreating, looked up in confusion. And then something responded. Not with words. Not with sound. But with understanding. A new future. The neural connection was brief but overwhelming. Halvorson staggered, gripping the console as raw concepts flooded his mind. Images, emotions, entire lifetimes of evolutionary struggle condensed into seconds. They had no name for themselves. They had no purpose, only instinct. But now, because of humanity, they were becoming. And they knew it. When Halvorson finally managed to speak, his voice was hoarse. Captain, they don't want war. Elias narrowed his eyes. Then what do they want? Halvorson met his gaze. A future. The Korthans wouldn't accept that answer. But maybe, just maybe, humanity could. Elias Dorn didn't trust easy answers. A species with no name, no history, and no identity was suddenly evolving into a structured, intelligent force. It was a phenomenon unlike anything humanity, or the galaxy, had ever encountered. If what Halvorson said was true, then these creatures weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were awakening. But that didn't mean they weren't dangerous. The battlefield was eerily silent. Korthan soldiers stood frozen, their weapons still gripped in trembling claws. The creatures, no, the newly evolved species, had stopped their onslaught, but their glowing eyes remained locked on the alien invaders. Everyone was waiting for something. Elias stepped forward, pulse hammering in his throat. Can you reach them again? He asked Halvorson. Halvorson wiped sweat from his brow. I think so. Their minds are complicated. It's not like talking, it's more like feeling concepts. Then feel your way into making sure they don't rip us apart. Halvorson took a deep breath and adjusted the neural frequency, sending another pulse of thought outward. A response came almost instantly. Not with words, but with images. The first contact. Elias saw them flashing across his mind like old film reels. A barren world shaped by violence. Beasts that fought, killed, consumed. A species that had never known unity, only survival. And then humans arrived. Strange, fragile creatures with minds unlike any they had encountered before. Minds that created. Minds that imagined. Minds that made connections. And now they were changing. Because of the humans. The realization sent a shudder through Elias. They don't hate us. Maya's voice was hushed. Then what do they feel? Halvorson swallowed. Curiosity. Fear. And something else, he hesitated. They're looking for a place in the galaxy. Elias exhaled. Well, they picked the worst species to learn from if they want peace. Because the Korthans were still standing. The Korthan decision. The Korthan commander, bruised and humiliated, snarled through the comms. You don't understand what you've unleashed, human? Elias tightened his grip on his sidearm. Explain it to me. These things aren't just evolving, they adapt to what they consume. What do you think happens when they start absorbing your intelligence, your ingenuity? What do you think happens when they understand war the way you do? Elias hesitated. That was a terrifying thought. But then he looked back at the creatures. They weren't attacking. They weren't consuming. They were waiting. Elias took a gamble. Maybe they don't have to be monsters. The Korthan commander's eyes burned with fury. Then you're a fool. We will return with a fleet. And when we do, we will burn this world until there is nothing left. Elias turned to Halvorson. Can they understand that? Halvorson nodded grimly. They understand threats very well. Elias' stomach twisted. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about who this species would become. Would they be another mindless terror, devouring all in their path? Or could they be something more? The choice was in front of them now. And they had seconds to make it. A new kind of war. A pulse rippled through the air. A response. Elias staggered as the neural wave struck his mind. He saw a decision being made, not with words, not with logic, but with raw, primal intent. The newly evolved creatures had weighed the Korthans. They had studied them. And they had reached a conclusion. The Korthans were a threat. The moment the realization hit, the battlefield exploded into chaos. The creatures didn't wait for the Korthans to strike first. They moved as a single unified force, a storm of bioluminescent bodies sweeping over the alien warriors like a tidal wave. The Korthans screamed as their defenses collapsed. They fired desperately, but their weapons had already been studied, analyzed, countered. It was a massacre. Elias barely had time to react before Maya grabbed his arm. "Captain, we need to get off this planet now." He turned to Halvorsen. "What about them? Can we still reach them?" Halvorsen was shaking. I don't know." His voice was hollow. "But I don't think they're stopping." And that was the problem. They had just witnessed the birth of a new apex species. And the first lesson they had truly learned was war. The battlefield was unrecognizable. The Korthans had been wiped out. Not defeated, not repelled, wiped out. Elias stood frozen, the scent of scorched metal and burning flesh thick in the air. The creatures, no, the newly evolved species, hadn't just fought back. They had learned, adapted, and executed a perfect counteroffensive with terrifying efficiency. It wasn't war. It was evolution in real time. And it scared the hell out of him. The aftermath. Maya pulled up a scan of the planet. "Korthan signatures are gone." "All of them?" Elias asked, though he already knew the answer. She nodded. "There are no survivors." The silence that followed was deafening. Halvorsen clutched his head, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They're still talking to me. They're grateful." "Grateful?" Elias asked, voice tight. Halvorsen's hands trembled. "They think we freed them. That we brought them the ability to fight back, to resist, to shape their future instead of being trapped in endless instinct." He exhaled shakily. "They see us as something close to gods." Elias felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "That's not good." Maya shook her head. "Not good at all. The first act of a new species. The creatures, no, the newborn civilization, began shifting, their bioluminescent bodies pulsing in strange patterns. They communicated not through words but through intent, through thought, through sheer understanding. And then a wave of neural pulses rippled outward. Halvorsen gasped. "They're making a decision." Elias took a step forward. "What kind of decision?" Halvorsen's face went pale. "They're going to war." Elias' blood ran cold. "Against who?" The response came not in words but in images. Visions of Korthan fleets, of alien ships descending upon planets, of countless species suffering under their rule. And then, an image of humans. Not as prey. Not as enemies. But as allies. Maya swore. "They're preparing for a galactic war and they think we're on their side." Elias clenched his fists. This wasn't just an isolated incident anymore. This was an awakening. The moment humanity had set foot on this world, they had changed it. And now, they had created something that could rival any empire in the galaxy. A new force. A new power. And they had just decided that their first act as a species would be vengeance. A decision for humanity. "We have to leave," Elias said, turning toward their ship. Maya nodded. "Now." But Halvorsen hesitated. "What if we stay? What if we teach them more? Guide them?" Elias turned, staring at the creatures as they moved in eerie unison, already preparing for their first war. "We already have," he said grimly. "And look what they learned first." The crew ran for the ship. As the engines roared to life, Elias cast one last look at the world below. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. And the humans who had sparked this fire had no way of putting it out. Final note. The universe is about to change forever, and humanity stands at the heart of it. What happens next? Subscribe to the Void Narratives for more mind-bending sci-fi stories. Rocket Fire.